So I grew up in Kentucky till I was about 12. My father, he was an alcoholic. And my mother, she was a good mother to me. But I guess she truly believed in once you get married, you stay married. So she kept me around my father when it wasn't a very good influence for me. A lot of negative memories as a child, a lot of negative places, experienced some things that I shouldn't have had to experience as a young child. Saw some things I shouldn't have seen, and I have two other sisters. I'm the youngest in my family, and I have an older brother, so I'm the baby. And my oldest sister, Judy, she come and got me when I was around 12 years old and let me move in with them. It seemed like the very first day I got to my sister's place, her husband, put me to work. And so at a very young age, I was taught how to work and was really good for me because I was used to doing pretty much whatever I wanted to. So I lived with them for pretty much until I was a young adult. And it was a very good experience for me. That was a Christian family, and they had a little baby right at the time I moved in, so I got to experience being the older brother, So that was definitely awesome. But after high school, I moved away, and I moved in with some guys that I went to high school with, and his older brother lived there as well, and I didn't really know him, but when I lived in this house, I got introduced to drugs, and at the time, it made me feel good, and I didn't see nothing really wrong with it. So I started experimenting with some stuff, and that led me down a very dark road, very quick. So I was probably about 20, 21 years old, and I was on drugs for probably about 21, for about 13 years, and it just went extremely worse, extremely fast, and I got to a point where I was using the needle, and I eventually got hooked on methamphetamine, and I had an empty void in me, and I kept trying to fill that emptiness with drugs. While I was living with my sister, my mother passed away when I was a freshman in high school. And when I was a senior, right after I graduated, my father passed away. So I really didn't know how to handle that. I really didn't know how to react, and I held that pain in for a long time. I had a loving family, my sister and her family. They loved me very much, but and they brought me up in church. And I knew God and I knew Jesus at a young age, but I chose to go the worldly way. I chose to follow my own path, and that didn't get me anywheres. It's difficult telling that part of the story. That the wrong decisions I made, the bad experiences, the drugs, the needle, being a junkie for years. But once I get to the part of finally accepting Christ as my Savior, that is the easy part to tell about. Well, it's important because to show what God can do in your life. It's important because at the very bottom that I was, I finally ended up in Indiana. And I was the worst I'd ever been. I pretty much had an IV and amphetamine in my arm at the time. I ended up homeless, and I ended up getting put in a mental ward. And I was there for about a week. And so after I left, I just took off walking. I was in a town that I didn't know. I was around people that I didn't know. I was completely alone. And I ended up walking, and I walked from Terre Haute, Indiana, and I ended up in Bloomfield. And a couple rides along the way by the police, they picked me up. And that's the first time in my life that I was actually, happy to see the police. Because throughout my life, I'd been a thief, I'd been a junkie. My heart was very hard, and I was bitter and angry. But once I started walking, and I was clean and sober for, at the hospital, they fed me for about 6 days. I was a whole lot skinnier than I am now. I was probably 100 pounds lighter. But they fed me, and I finally got to thinking clearly. And there's one thing that I didn't forget through all this, and I learned this at a young age. Because my mother took me to church, I always remember that there was a God and about Jesus and the stories that I'd heard. But I never really put it into action. Well, I finally reached a point in my life. I was in a mental ward, okay? I'd lost all communication with anybody that ever cared anything about me. I was completely alone. And like I said a while ago, I took off walking when they released me from that mental ward. And I ended up in Bloomfield. Yeah. Right, I didn't know where I was going. I really didn't have a plan. I didn't know, I just didn't know. But all of a sudden I ended up at Rebuilt Ministries in Bloomfield, in a little town in Indiana. And I went to a church door. I passed the church and I seen some people in there. It was on a Sunday morning. And I went to the door and I couldn't quite make up my mind what I wanted to do. So I left, but I came right back. I didn't get probably 20 feet from the door, and I came back to the door and I just stood there. And I went away again. But there was a man in there, and he come out after me. And he got my attention, and he brung me in there. And they fed me. They gave me a place to live. And I finally got to experience some love in my life. And that very church that I ended up at, my wife was in there at the time. I didn't even know her, but she was in there, and she was the one of the people that prayed over me. So I went to the recovery center, and it was a 9-month program, and that gave me time to get my mind right and just finally, be able to chase after that relationship with God that I always knew I wanted, but I just never made that decision to. I never really surrendered before in my life. So I was there 9 months, and God really worked on me through that time, and He changed me. He completely softened my heart, because I had a very hard heart. And at the good day I graduated from the recovery center is the day I got married. So I ended up getting married, and I was able to reestablish my relationship with my sister and a lot of family members at the time. Well, I live in Bloomfield, Indiana, not far from the church that I went through the doors at, and I work for Renewing Management, and I do maintenance for them. I live right next to a recovery center, and I get to hold recovery classes every Tuesday evening for anyone that's struggling, and they're struggling with drug addiction, and God's placed me there, and I'm very happy where I'm at. I finally get the opportunity to be a good father and a good husband. It's just a wonderful thing to work for a company that gives me a place to live and establish me a firm foundation like they have. And they do that through Jesus, you know. And I'm just very happy and thankful for it. No matter where you are in life, no matter the difficulties that you're facing or that lay ahead, that you can put your trust in Jesus. And He can soften your heart, and He can establish you somewheres, give you a firm foundation, and give you a desire to help others. And He will use the very testimony that you've been through to do that. So just give Him a chance, is what I'd say.